The sun hung high in the sky, casting its warm, golden light over the campus, as the sounds of celebration echoed through the air. Laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses filled the space where families and friends gathered to witness a momentous occasion. The atmosphere was alive with joy. This was the day of graduation, the day we would cross the stage and finally receive the recognition we had worked so hard for. But as I sat there, alone in my car, with a half-eaten box of cold fries and a cup of lukewarm coffee, everything felt distant. The voices, the clapping, the joy, it all seemed like it was happening to someone else. Not to me. I could barely bring myself to look at the festivities unfolding outside my window. The world was celebrating, and I was stuck in a bubble of my own quiet desolation. I was supposed to feel proud. Proud of everything I had achieved, proud of my accomplishments. But I didn't. The pride was buried beneath a heavy layer of disappointment, thick with the weight of unspoken words and promises never kept. The empty seat beside me in the car was a glaring reminder of who wasn't there. They weren't there. They never were. My family, my parents, my siblings, none of them had shown up. It wasn't that I expected them to drop everything and be there, but somewhere, deep down, I had hoped. I had hoped that, just once, they would make the effort to show up for me, to stand in that crowd and clap for me, as everyone else was getting clapped for. But no, this was my reality, alone, once again. It wasn't the first time they had missed something important. I had grown accustomed to it over the years. Birthdays, school events, concerts, it all blended together in a long list of things I had done on my own. I used to hold on to the hope that things would be different. But the years had slowly chipped away at that hope, until there was nothing left but the quiet acceptance of what was. As I watched the other graduates make their way across the stage, their families cheering them on, I felt a twinge of envy, but it was fleeting. The absence of my family was not the tragedy. The tragedy was that I had come to expect it. The clock ticked on. It was time for me to walk. I grabbed my things and headed toward the ceremony, trying to push down the lump in my throat. I would go through the motions, the smiles, the handshakes, the empty congratulations. I had to. It was expected. But in that moment, I didn't care about the diploma. I didn't care about the ceremony. I just wanted to feel seen. I wanted to feel like I mattered to someone. As I walked toward the stage, the noise of the ceremony seemed to grow fainter. The sound of the crowd cheering, clapping, and shouting names felt like it was happening on the other side of a thick glass wall. Every step I took felt distant, like I was walking in a dream. The reality around me was painfully clear. Everyone else had their families. The proud smiles, the photos, the embraces, it was all happening right in front of me. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel any part of it. It was like being a ghost, invisible in a sea of vibrant, living people. When my name was called, I forced a smile, trying to make it look like everything was fine as I stepped onto the stage. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't need to see the empty seat beside me, the place that should have been filled with a familiar face, a smile, some sign that someone cared enough to show up. I accepted my diploma, the thick paper cold and indifferent in my hand. It felt hollow. The moment was supposed to be a victory, but all I could feel was a sharp emptiness creeping in. The applause that followed felt distant, like an echo bouncing off the walls, never quite reaching me. I scanned the faces in the crowd, looking for something, anything that would tell me that I wasn't alone in this moment. But no one was looking back at me. My eyes searched for my family, but there was no sign of them. No comforting glance, no proud gaze. Just strangers, clapping for a name they didn't know. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't just alone on the stage. I was alone in this whole experience. This achievement, this moment, meant nothing without anyone to share it with. My heart sank as I stood there, feeling smaller with every passing second. But I had long stopped expecting anything from them. After years of hoping and being let down, I had learned to live with it. Their absence no longer felt like an aching wound. It was more like a numbness, a part of my reality I had come to accept. Yet, even in that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. It wasn't just the empty seat beside me. It was the absence that stretched through my whole life. My family wasn't here because they didn't care, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that. And that hurt more than I could put into words. As I turned to leave the stage, my footsteps echoed in my mind. The applause continued, but it was nothing more than background noise. It wasn't for me. It wasn't about me. It was for everyone else. And just as I reached the edge of the stage, I realized something else. I was no longer sure if I was doing this for anyone but myself. Maybe this day wasn't about celebrating the pride of my family or the joy of having others around me. Maybe it was just about surviving it. The rest of the ceremony blurred in a haze. I barely remember sitting back down or hearing the names of the other graduates being called. I was numb, lost in the thoughts of how little anyone seemed to care. But deep down, I was certain of one thing. I couldn't keep living for others. I couldn't keep waiting for them to notice. It was time to stop waiting for a family that didn't show up. It was time to learn how to stand on my own. And maybe, just maybe, in that quiet, painful realization, I could finally find my own peace. I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity, staring out at the crowd, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter, that the absence of my family wasn't a reflection of who I was or what I had accomplished. But the emptiness inside me seemed to grow with each passing moment, threatening to consume the small bit of dignity I had left. The parking lot outside the ceremony hall had quieted, the buzz of celebration fading into a distant hum. Most of the graduates were already gone, either heading out to family dinners or joining their friends for post-graduation celebrations. I was alone. Again, I could feel the heaviness of the day settling into my bones, like an anchor I couldn't escape. I glanced down at the small keychain in my hand, the one I had picked up from the stage. The polished metal caught the light, and for a moment, I wondered if it was even real. Was it just another token that didn't mean anything? A piece of metal with my name etched on it. A reminder that I had made it, but no one had been there to share it with me. It felt like a cruel joke, a symbol of all the things I had never gotten, all the recognition I had never received. No cheers, no celebration, no one to look at me and say, "I'm proud of you." I let out a slow, steady breath, trying to steady the rising tide of frustration, anger, and sadness. I couldn't go back into that hall. I couldn't pretend that the applause meant something. I couldn't pretend that I had what everyone else had, people who loved and supported them. All I had was this cold moment of loneliness that seemed to follow me everywhere. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the window. Startled, I looked up. Standing there, outside my car, was a figure I hadn't expected. It was Principal Callahan. His face, normally so serious and composed, was softer now, almost like he knew something about me that I hadn't let anyone else see. He wasn't like the other teachers who had congratulated students and quickly moved on. He was standing there, looking at me, not in judgment, but in understanding, like he could sense the emptiness I was feeling. I hesitated for a moment before I rolled down the window. His eyes softened as he glanced down at me, a small but genuine smile playing on his lips. "I thought I'd find you here," he said quietly, as if he had known exactly where to look. "You did it. You graduated. I know it's not the way you imagined it, but you made it. And I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say. The words I had wanted to hear for so long, words I had begged to hear from my family, came from someone who didn't even know me that well. And yet, there was something real in his voice, something genuine that made my throat tighten. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bag, handing it to me with a gesture of quiet kindness. "I thought you might need this." I took the bag from him, fingers trembling slightly as I untied the string. Inside was a small keychain, identical to the one I had picked up from the stage earlier. But this one wasn't cold and impersonal. It was warm, filled with a meaning I hadn't expected. On the keychain was my name. But it wasn't just the name. It was the fact that someone had noticed me. Someone had taken the time to think of me, to show up, even when no one else had. And in that moment, I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe before. I wasn't invisible. For the first time that day, a lump formed in my throat, not because of sadness, but because of something different, something I hadn't felt in years. Recognition. "I see you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You matter. You've always mattered. And I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard, trying to control the emotions welling up inside me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone in this world. Enough to make me realize that even in the darkest moments, there were still people who would choose to see you. I couldn't find the words to say thank you. I didn't know if they were enough to express the weight of what I was feeling, but I nodded, the weight in my chest finally beginning to lift, even if just a little. As Principal Callahan turned to leave, he paused and looked back at me. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small, he said quietly. You've earned this, and you deserve to be seen. And with that, he was gone, disappearing back into the fading light of the ceremony. But his words stayed with me, echoing in my mind. For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe again. I sat there, holding the keychain in my hand, my fingers tracing the etched letters of my name, over and over again. It was a small thing, a tiny gesture really, but it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. The cool metal in my palm seemed to warm with every passing second, like it was imbued with something far greater than its physical form. For the first time that day, I felt like someone had seen me, not just as a student crossing a stage, not just as someone who had been forgotten by her family, but as a person with hopes, struggles, and dreams that deserved recognition. It wasn't just about a keychain. It wasn't about the ceremony. It was about the fact that someone had cared enough to acknowledge my presence, to see the effort I had put in, even when I couldn't feel like it was enough. I could still hear Principal Callahan's words echoing in my mind. You matter. You've always mattered. How many times had I doubted that? How many times had I asked myself if anyone would even notice if I just disappeared? I had spent so many years in the shadow of my family's indifference, constantly questioning my worth, constantly wondering why they couldn't just show up for me. But in that moment, his words pierced through the fog of doubt and self-loathing, like a light breaking through the clouds. But it wasn't just his words that made the difference. It was the quiet action, the simple gesture of handing me something meaningful, when it seemed like the world was telling me I was invisible. That small act of kindness meant more than anything I had expected. I wanted to scream, to cry, to let it all out. The frustration, the sadness, the loneliness, it all swelled up inside me. But instead, I just sat there, holding the keychain and staring out the window, watching the world continue to spin without me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to just be. I didn't have to put on a smile. I didn't have to pretend that everything was okay. I didn't have to act like I wasn't affected by everything that had happened. It was enough to just exist in that moment, in the quiet space where I could finally be seen for who I was. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to make others notice me. But in the end, it wasn't about their validation. It was about finding that sense of self-worth, the kind that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. And for the first time, I felt it. I felt like I mattered. But even as the weight of that realization began to settle within me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was the recognition. Maybe it was the quiet acknowledgement of my existence. Maybe it was the idea that, despite everything, I had made it through. Principal Callahan's voice rang in my ears again. You've earned this. He was right. I had earned it. This wasn't just a moment of validation from someone else. It was my own victory. It was proof that I had been strong enough to survive, strong enough to reach this point despite the odds stacked against me. As I sat there, lost in thought, I realized that the journey had never been about them. It had never been about my family showing up or anyone else noticing my struggle. It had always been about me, about proving to myself that I could do it, even when no one else believed I could. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle within me. I wasn't sure where I would go from here, but I knew one thing. I was no longer waiting for anyone to show up for me. I had shown up for myself, and that was enough. With the keychain in my hand, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the parking lot, my heart a little lighter than it had been before. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I had imagined, but somehow it was enough. The world outside seemed to stretch endlessly before me as I walked toward the parking lot, each step echoing like a soft declaration of independence. I wasn't quite sure where I was going, but I knew it was away from the past that had never recognized me, the past that had always left me on the sidelines, invisible. For years, I had lived under the shadow of expectations I could never meet. Expectations from my family, expectations of success, of pride, of accomplishment. I had fought so hard to earn their approval, to gain their attention, but it always felt like I was chasing something just out of reach. And now, in this moment, I was finally realizing the truth. Their approval wasn't the prize. It never had been. The keychain, still clutched tightly in my hand, was more than just a trinket. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. The years of quiet struggle, the nights spent alone, wondering if I mattered, if I was ever going to be seen for who I really was. I had always believed that family was the measure of worth. That love and recognition had to come from the people who shared your blood. But today, I realized that wasn't true. What mattered more than blood was the choice to care, the choice to stand by someone, to see them for who they truly were, flaws and all. The truth was, family didn't have to be defined by blood. It could be chosen. And for the first time in my life, I understood what that meant. As I made my way out of the parking lot, my gaze was drawn to the group of graduates laughing and taking pictures with their families. I used to envy them, their easy smiles, their perfect moments. But now I saw something else. I saw how fleeting those moments were, how easy it was to take for granted the people who were always there. The truth was, not everyone had a family to rely on. Not everyone had that steady support, that guaranteed love. And maybe, just maybe, it was okay. It was okay to be alone. Because being alone meant I had learned to depend on myself. But I wasn't truly alone. Not anymore. There were people who had chosen me. People like Principal Callahan, who had seen something in me when no one else did. People who had stepped into my life and offered me the recognition I had so desperately craved. They were the ones who mattered. They were the ones who made me believe that I was enough, even when I hadn't believed it myself. I thought about my family, how they had never once looked at me and said, "I see you." But I also thought about those who had, even in the smallest ways. About the people who had taken the time to show up for me, to acknowledge my struggle, to recognize that I was more than just the absence of someone else's presence. I stopped for a moment, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft, golden glow over the horizon. The world around me was calm, peaceful, as though it too understood the weight of this moment. I didn't need to go back. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The silence I had once felt, deafening and hollow, had been replaced by something new. A quiet peace, a sense of belonging, not to the people who should have been there, but to the life I had made for myself. I turned toward the exit and walked out of the ceremony grounds, my heart still heavy with everything that had come before, but lighter with the understanding that it didn't define me. The recognition I had longed for had come from an unexpected place, and in that moment, I realized that it was the only kind that truly mattered. My family didn't need to be blood. I didn't need to wait for them anymore. The world was full of people who could choose to see me, who could choose to walk alongside me, even when the ones I had hoped would be there didn't show up. And as I stepped into the night, I finally understood what it meant to be free, to be seen, to matter. I didn't need to be defined by the empty seat anymore. I had become my own family, and that was more than enough.